So, okay, so ISC West, I saw you just a few days ago,
Yeah, wasn't that long.
and that was a good conference for you?
I enjoyed it. It was, for me personally, the networking, and it's always great.
It's always good.
I meet a lot of good people.
Yeah,
For the company, it was really good.
good. Yeah, I love the big conferences. I get to see people that I only see maybe once a year at those conferences from other countries and stuff. And I only see you at conferences, so I
No,
mean,
that's the only place. This is the first time outside of a conference.
yeah, that's the networking at these conferences is just, you can't beat it.
It's been, I think I've been in the industry for 3 years on the private side, and just the networking at conferences. I've met so many people, and I've had job opportunities, consulting opportunities, career advancement in so many different ways that I wouldn't have gotten without that networking.
No, it opens up a whole new world of new connections, and you get to nurture existing relationships,
Of course.
which is super important.
course.
So it was a good show for you.
Oh yeah.
And it was in Vegas, so that's always interesting.
You know, I don't like Vegas.
No?
That's horrible. I got married in Vegas.
Oh, is that right?
And then my husband and I went back for our 1-year anniversary. Had a great time, like too much fun. And then ever since, go back for conferences.
Well, you know, it depends on your mood and the people you're around
That's true.
and the weather and what you're doing. So it's hit and miss.
It is hit and miss.
But it's definitely an environment for a lot of things to happen because there's so much going on all the time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm good. Well, good. I'm glad that the show was successful for you.
It was good.
I mean, company-wise, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Company had a lot of leads. We had people who were actually seeking us out. We were in a really horrible spot. I mean, you came by up against a wall that people had to like zigzag and find, teeny tiny booth. But we actually had people that were having concerns, so they came to find us.
Yeah.
Which doesn't happen very often.
Well, that's a good, that means word's getting out.
Exactly.
And business will grow. Welcome to Down and Dirty with Michael Julian. On the show, we're getting raw, real, and leaving no stone unturned. Each week, I sit down with some truly remarkable people who have overcome adversity in their lives. My guests are warriors who took their pain and turned it into power. So get comfortable because we're about to get down and dirty. Well, Rebecca, I'm so glad that you're here with me today. I've been looking forward to this time together because I know just a little bit about your story, but as soon as I heard it, I'm like, oh my God, I've got to have her on my show. But I have not asked you any other questions because I want to find out organically for the very first time because I know you've got a great story and I already know you personally enough to know you're an awesome person. So that much I know is going to be great. But let's just start kind of from the beginning. Where are you from? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Spokane, Washington.
Oh, okay.
So I'm a West Coast girl.
Yeah.
You know, I have my dad, my mom, and an older brother.
Both
and
still
a
living?
sister.
That's great. Are you close with your family?
I'm very close with my dad and my sister. Extremely close. My dad is like the epitome of a man's man.
Right on.
Very, very manly man.
You like the alphas?
I do.
Okay.
My dad works for Waste Management. He's been a garbage man. I think we're coming up on 28 years because a couple weeks we celebrate his retirement. But, you know, just a big, tall, jacked up man.
Right on.
But beside all that, just a very protective person.
Yeah.
So I grew up very naive, very sheltered.
Because you had your dad to protect you, so you didn't need to learn how to protect yourself.
I didn't. So it was my brother and I have different dads. So he was with his dad a lot more than, you know, my sister and I were always together. And so we were extremely protected, never wanted or needed it for anything from my, you know, anybody else. My dad always covered it.
You were provided for.
Exactly.
Very cool.
You know, growing up with that, I was sheltered and I was very ignorant to what was actually out there in the real world. So when I got my first job, you know, I still got to be protected. I worked little kids' clothing stores and coffee stands, but I always had somebody I could call if there was an emergency. And got with my first husband. We were dating all through high school, ended up going to college together at the University of Idaho, and then ultimately got married. And
How old were you when you got married?
19.
Oh my, you were young.
I was young.
Yeah.
I look back now and I was, you know, so many people said, don't do it. You're so young.
Yeah.
You have so much life to live. It's like, you know, you grow up a certain way. Like my dad looked at it. I wanted to be in the Air Force, wanted to join the military. Go out to Fairchild Air Force Base every year, watch all the female pilots. And that's what I wanted to be, a pilot. And I learned I couldn't be a pilot because I can't see, wear contacts,
Oh.
bad vision. So from there, I knew I really wanted to get into public service, but my dad was very against it.
Yeah.
So, you know, hey, you're a girl, you need to get married, you need to go be a
He wanted to
teacher.
continue protecting you and make sure
Exactly.
you were protected. Do you think that because you were so protected your whole life, that's why you wanted to be in an environment where you had to be able to like come out of that and actually be independent and protect yourself?
I mean, I've reflected on this so much. The reason I got divorced from my first husband was because he wasn't what I thought a man should be. You know, I'm not saying he's not a bad man. I'm not saying that he wasn't a protector in his
Right.
way. It just was different than what I was used to.
Right.
So for me, when I got divorced, it was right when I was starting my career in law enforcement. And I kind of looked at it as like, I need to be my own protector. I don't need anybody else to protect me. I can do this myself.
Right.
I can do exactly what my dad did, but for myself. So, I mean, I lived in Louisiana when I got divorced, 20 years old, was starting my career in law enforcement, and that's kind of how I looked at it. Like, I'm going to protect myself, and in order to learn how to do that, I'm going to become a cop.
So I'm interested in something. You chose, so you were in a protected environment, and then you chose a man. Did you believe that he was going to be a protector at first, or were you drawn to him because he wasn't, and that was your time to start coming out of that?
I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question. And when I look back at that, you know, I say over and over again, my ex-husband is a phenomenal person. He's a great man. He's very tall. He was an officer in the military. So for me, it was like I had that connection with him because of the career path he was taking. Yeah. His mother was a state trooper in Washington. So he grew up from a protective family, but that's not what he ended up being. It was a different type of protector. It was emotional. It wasn't the physical or the, you know, the strong male persona
Right.
that I was used to.
Right.
So I don't say that he's not a protector. That's horrible to say that. I don't want him to come off as weak in any way. It's just different than what I was used to.
Okay, now let's go one layer deeper. Do you think that because of where you were in your life and you were coming out of this protected shell, you were now exhibiting or putting off this energy that made him feel like he did not have to be a protector, but then because of that you lost the interest or the attraction? So your guys' energy kind of butted up against each other.
It's exactly what happened.
Okay.
That's what happened because so for him, he was, again, an officer in the military.
Yeah.
He was a butter bar, a lieutenant.
But he was an alpha badass mother effer to begin with. But because of where you were, it kind of changed him a little bit.
It did. It really did. So we were at Fort Benning, Georgia. He did air assault, airborne school. Then he got accepted to Ranger School. So he was
I'd say he was a
infantry. He was armor, you know, dismounted. This is all the stuff I remember listening to and learning.
Right.
And he would spend a lot of time in the field. You know, his MOS was 509th, and that's how he ended up in Louisiana.
Right.
He worked in the field being a role player, preparing soldiers to deploy. So he was a badass. He is a badass still to this day, but it just, the dynamic in our relationship, I was looking for something a little different, and he was looking for the emotional connection and somebody that could be there to accept him for not being the man's man.
Right.
And I wasn't in that space.
Well, the balance wasn't there.
It wasn't.
You guys couldn't be each other's yin and yang. And that happens. You know, timing and where we at and how we develop in our lives and the courses and the journeys that we end up taking, sometimes there just isn't a match there.
It happened for a reason. I'm extremely grateful for the relationship that we had. I'm grateful for, you know, the opportunities that it presented me in my life. And it wasn't, you know, you talk to military spouses and there's the stigma. You get the dependopotamus or whatever. It's a female that's going to look for a man that could take them away from their family.
Right.
I wasn't looking for that. I didn't know what I was looking for. I just knew I loved him.
Right.
And when we got married, the dynamic changed. We moved away from family. You know, I remember leaving, and my dad drove out to Newman Lake, Washington, where my ex-husband's family lived. And we were staying with them right after school, getting ready to leave. My dad showed up, and my dad cried. And it was
What was that like for you?
Horrible. It was horrible. My dad's been my hero my whole life. It's very apparent that he's been my hero. I did a pageant, and my whole speech was about my dad and why he was my hero. And, you know, normally I get really choked up when I do talk about him, just because, you know, I look at him and his life is not what it could have been, and it's because he was so busy protecting everyone else. So, for me to leave, and it was just kind of like something clicked in my head. Like, I have to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. I'm not going to have anyone near me. I'm moving from Spokane, Washington to Fort Benning, Georgia.
Right.
I remember crying when we drove away, and my ex-husband just bawled and bawled, and I was finally over it. And like 3 hours on the ride, like looking forward to this new adventure. I'm so excited, and he's still over there crying.
Yeah.
And it's horrible that I look at it that way, but that's how I looked at it in the
Sure.
moment.
Yeah.
Like, why are you crying so much? This is a new adventure. Now, in my 30s, I would look back at it and go, well, it was life changing.
Yeah. And so you can kind of sympathize with why he was so emotional
Yes.
about it. So curious, you had this alpha badass protector father who was always, and I don't mean to get too magical mystical about it, but I'm going to because I think it's the right terminology. He was very caught up and centered in the masculine energy your whole life. And then when he cried and kind of, which was probably good for him, he needed it. He was kind of in his feminine energy, which balances. Look, a man's man that's a man's man all the time without any kind of sensitivity or feminine, I don't know what the right word is, but feminine energy or whatever, that's out of balance.
Yeah.
And that's not good for them. But you said it bothered you, or it was uncomfortable when you saw your father cry.
It was uncomfortable because that was when I first felt like I wanted to protect him.
That must have been so uncomfortable.
Extremely.
That wasn't your norm.
Well, just a couple years earlier, my parents got divorced. So between my junior and senior year, my parents got divorced. My mom kind of went off the deep end, lost it a little bit.
Yeah.
Our house was going into foreclosure. Cars were being repossessed. I mean, it was really bad.
Upheaval.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
My sister and I decided to go with my dad. There was no choice.
Right.
I mean, we knew our mom couldn't support us
Sure.
and whatever.
Sure.
But that after that happened and us moving away, my mom was the one that threw herself on the car crying. My mom was the one that was pleading for us to stay. But my dad was strong. But for some reason, I just wanted to hug my dad.
Yeah.
And I felt compassion towards him,
Right.
and not her.
Because he wasn't able to express what he was going through, and you knew it was hard for him.
Oh, yeah.
It was
didn't wanna leave.
horrendously emotional for him, but he was staying stoic for you guys, and so you probably felt like, oh, he's missing out on what he needs to do because he's being the man for us.
Yeah.
So you probably felt sorry or sympathetic or like you wanted to nurture him.
I wanted to nurture him.
Yeah.
I'm I'm a mom now. I'm not a very nurturing person, and I don't know why I'm not like that. I love my son. I love my husband. My husband, Andrew, he's a really good balance of man's man and emotions, which he wasn't. When we first started dating, he wasn't like that at all. It was very stoic, very
Sure.
keep your feelings inside.
Which you were probably attracted to in the
which I was
beginning.
attracted to.
Well, something in you must have balance now because something in you helped him find balance by getting more in touch with his emotional side.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the first time he cried, he just kind of looked at me like, this doesn't happen.
It's weird.
And, he was embarrassed. We don't cry. I'm not supposed to
Right,
cry.
right.
And now it's like, we'll have our time. We say we're going to do our own podcast at some point, just for the fact that we can sit on our back porch and we'll have hours worth of conversations that just the emotional roller coaster we go on. And it could be something as simple as what we went through that day,
Sure.
or just reflecting on
Something you went through in the
times
past.
from our experience as first responders.
Sure.
He was a first responder as well.
That would probably be an amazing podcast that a lot of people would get a lot out of.
Yeah, probably.
Seriously.
It's
I mean, if
different.
kids can sit and watch other people play video games at that level of intellect, adults watching other adults reminisce and talk about their experiences that helped balance and equalize them is going to be really, I think, fulfilling and good for other people. So it's not a bad idea. You might have to go in that direction.
Hey, we have a great relationship. Everybody has their flaws in their relationship.
Of course.
Right? But there's never been, we've been married for almost, 7 years? 6, 7 years.
Yeah.
And coming up this month. And I mean, I understand when people say I love somebody more and more every day.
Sure.
I actually love him more and more every day. I'm not faking it.
Yeah.
This is real, true emotion that I feel towards him, and I feel it's reciprocated. So the emotional connection is really just what has made the relationship that I have.
You must have a lot of security in that relationship.
I sure do.
Yeah.
I do. So I'm, everybody's had their weaknesses. They've had their times.
Sure.
But just think the amount of trust that he has to have in me,
Yeah.
and I have to have in him
Yeah.
with my travel schedule.
Yeah.
I know I'm on the road. I've been on the road for 3 weeks now, and I have 4 more weeks of travel to where I'll go home maybe 2 or 3 days a week here and there. And he has to trust that, you know, I'm out here protecting myself
Right.
and
Right.
on the straight and narrow doing the right thing.
Right.
And we don't fault in that.
Yeah. A relationship that lacks security and balance would not thrive in that environment because of just opportunities, lack of control. You don't know what that person's doing, so you have to trust and have faith in them to do whatever is best for them and ultimately what's best for the relationship.
Exactly. It was not easy my first year out of law enforcement.
Yeah.
It was not easy. It was difficult because I traveled 300 nights that year.
Well, I'm really looking forward to getting into that part because that's the first bit of information I got about you that sparked my interest in having you on, and then I got to know you as a person. So then I've enjoyed that relationship and talking about that. A little bit more about your personal and family life. So you have how many kids?
One child,
What age? Calvin.
He's 5.
5. And you say it like maybe you don't want to have another child?
We will not be having any more children.
Okay.
And it's not because of him. I ended up having a hysterectomy right after he was born.
Okay.
I had cervical cancer cells. So they, didn't find it previous to my son, me being pregnant. And then during my pregnancy is when it was found. And so from there I had a couple laparoscopic surgeries because the doctor was thinking, endometriosis, is it this, is it that? And then come to find out I had a lot of bad cells. So the doctor was 28. And the doctor said, either you have a kid right now, which just had my son,
Right.
or we have to do the hysterectomy.
Right.
So we went forward with the hysterectomy.
Then worked out well the way it did because one, having your child is how they found the cancer.
Yes. Yeah.
Sounds like it worked out perfectly.
It really did. He saved my life.
Maybe literally.
Literally, he saved my life.
Yeah.
If you talk to my mother-in-law, it's my husband's stepmom, but she was part of raising him, Stephanie. She always talks about how pregnancy was the worst thing that I went through. For her to say that, to reflect on that, she watched what I went through, the health scares, the, fluid retention. I was huge. And
it was the worst thing for you to go through.
Yes, exactly.
For you, it saved your life.
Saved my life.
Different people, different experiences, different emotions attached to those situations.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, good. Well, congratulations on that and being cancer-free.
Thank you.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
And because you've got so much balance in your life, you will probably remain cancer-free.
Let's hope so.
Because lack of balance and all of that negative stuff that we deal with, I think personally, I think it ends up, what's the word, manifesting into negative body stuff, negative health stuff.
That's what my mother-in-law talks about all the time. She has MS. Really bad.
Yeah.
It's horrible. She has drop leg. She struggles to get around. She just went through a stem cell treatment. So she lost all of her hair and it grew back. It's like little old lady hair.
Yeah.
But she's one of those people that she doesn't play the victim.
Good.
And that's how she words it. I don't play the victim. I'm not the victim. I'm going to come out here and do what I can to keep going.
Yeah.
So that's a mentality that I try to live by.
It is a mentality and a mindset. And I'll tell you, playing the victim, I think that their forward growth stops as long as they play the victim. When they give that up and they stop being the victim and they accept whatever's happened to them, that's when their forward growth as a person, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, whatever, that's when it can flourish.
I have lived by that motto pretty much my whole life, but mine was more of just because I'm a girl. I don't ever want to be able to use that as in like the victim because I'm a female.
Yeah.
That I didn't get this because I'm a girl, or they didn't want me because I'm a female. I never wanted to live by that slogan of victimology.
Well, and I think if you followed that to the root, that would probably come up from you having a strong father figure because he taught you that.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, that's awesome.
We talk about this now. I didn't grow up talking about politics. I didn't grow up talking about, girls might be treated different or boys would be treated different. We were never treated like that.
Yeah.
I was treated differently because I was his daughter.
Right.
And I know that now, but at the time I didn't.
Right.
And he never spoke those words to us.
But he also taught you to be strong by example and by learning. I would imagine your dad was probably somebody that was always preparing you for life. So you grew up ready. You grew up ready to not be a victim because you took personal responsibility for what you were doing and what was happening to you, and you didn't let it stop you.
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'd love to meet your dad someday. He sounds like a great guy.
He's a great man.
Good.
Great man.
So let's talk a little bit about, and where are you living now?
Louisiana.
Okay.
Lake Charles.
Okay, that's right. I remember that. And I remember the other day when I ran into you, Lake Charles has a place in my memory because I can't remember if it was Rita, Gustav, or Ike. I want to say it was Ike that just demolished Lake. No, was it?
Rita.
Rita. That was the second one I deployed on. And I remember driving through Lake Charles and it was just flattened. I mean, I've never seen destruction like that before.
Oh, you should have come in 2020.
Yeah.
So in August 2020, we had Hurricane Laura, which was a Category 5.
Yeah.
And it was, when they were tracking the wind, it was so high that it actually, I can't even remember what the levels were, but it was, if it hit some wind level, then we didn't have to pay our insurance deductibles.
Wow.
So it was really bad.
Yeah.
And my husband and I, we had just had our son. And so we were both first responders. He worked for the fire department. I was for the police department. And I was fortunate enough that I got to leave because we had a new son.
Wait, did you work for Lake Charles Parish?
I worked for Sulphur Police Department.
Okay.
Which is, so you have Calcasieu Parish. Lake Charles is in Calcasieu, and Sulphur is the town right next to Lake Charles.
Okay.
So it's a little smaller, but more drug crime.
Yeah.
Lots of drug crime.
Yeah. That's too bad. It must be somewhat boring to live there, so people do a lot of drugs.
The only thing in Lake Charles is casinos and then refineries.
Right.
So one of the towns, you have Moss Bluff. It's a town just north of Lake Charles. That's where I live. And just south of that, in between Lake Charles and Moss Bluff, you have Westlake. And you have refinery pipes that run through the city.
Wow.
So you feel like you're driving through a refinery.
Yeah.
It's very boring. The water is extremely dirty.
Oh.
But the people are amazing.
Yeah.
The food is really good.
Oh yeah. I love that food down there. One of my deployments, the client brought in a guy that literally had a pusher bus turned into a kitchen, and he was from Louisiana. All the food was Louisiana. You know, etouffee,
Probably
jambalaya, gumbo.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I fell in love with that food.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. I gained a lot of weight when I first moved to Louisiana, and that's where I learned to cook.
Yeah.
Louisiana.
Yeah. Well,
We
I bet
good.
you cooked some good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of spice.
Lots of spice.
Lot
I didn't
of
like
seasoning.
spice when I grew up in Washington.
Yeah.
And we didn't season our food till after. You know, you get your salt and pepper after you
Right,
get your meal,
right.
and you salt and pepper
Oh
it.
no, they dump it in while they're cooking it. Oh,
Tony Chachere's, we live on that.
yeah.
I go through like the big bottles of that
Yeah.
probably twice a month.
Yeah. You're making my mouth water. Okay, so tell me about your professional career. How did that start out in Louisiana? It was what you told me, the police department.
Yes.
How did it evolve from there?
So I went behind my ex-husband's back. I applied to the little police department in Leesville. So it was the city police department. I went out and took the PT test. I barely passed it. I was not in any shape to be running, doing push-ups, sit-ups.
How were you not, did you not have this physique then? Were you heavier or?
I actually was a runner. So I ran all through high school. And then after I left school, you know, I stopped really running. I did ROTC. I did their morning workouts. I'd go do that here and there, but I hated it.
Yeah.
So, you know, 19, 20 years old, I wasn't really working out every day.
Right.
Didn't look at it like I needed to.
Right.
I was a little heavier, definitely wasn't in the best shape of my life. So when I passed the PT test, I remember the lieutenant, he looked at me, he was like, we need a female.
Yeah.
You know, we don't really have many females. There was, you know, women that were investigative, but no one that was really patrol. So, you know, I went through the police academy. I had to drive an hour there, an hour back every day. And I had somebody that was going through it with me, St. Clergy. He was retired from the military.
Now your husband knew at this point that you'd applied, obviously, because you were.
After I started in the academy, yes. So I had been in it for about a month before he knew.
How did he not clue into what was going on?
About 3 to 4 weeks in the field every month.
And he didn't know where you were and he didn't ask? You were just out doing cop stuff?
I was going to the academy. It's horrible. I look back and it was horrible. But when we talked about me getting a job, you know, I compare that part of my ex-husband to my dad is that there was the control aspect of, you know, the finances and what I could contribute and what I can take away. And for me, I always wanted to have a career. I didn't want to have a job. I wanted a career. And he said, just go get a job at McDonald's. You're a military spouse. We're going to be moving all the time, so you don't really want to go get a career. But that's not how I felt.
Right.
So, I remember seeing a law enforcement officer in Georgia. There was a funeral procession, and it went for miles. And I remember pulling over and just watching it, and it just kind of like brought up that desire to be in public service.
Yeah.
Like, he made the ultimate sacrifice. Why wouldn't I go out there and try and be a protector? So that's where it all really spouted from. It's just the desire to be in public service, seeing something that meant so much to me, and then my husband really being, no, you don't need a career. You're just going to keep moving.
Right.
So it kind of lit a fire in my ass.
Right, right.
I'm going to go out there. I'm going to do what I want to do.
You got a little bit of a defiant streaking.
Yes. I still slightly have that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, my coworkers and any supervisor I've ever had knows that.
Mm-hmm.
But if we go back to Will Plummer, that was one thing he told me that he loved about me. It's the intangibles. I'm a little defiant. I'm going to kind of push back in any way that I can if I don't agree with something. But no one's ever going to tell me I can't do something. Is the attitude.
That is definitely a motivating factor for some I think people like us. Some of my greatest accomplishments were because somebody thought or said I couldn't do it. And I said, hold my beer, bitches, watch this.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think that's a really good trait and characteristic. Whatever it takes to inspire us or motivate us to be better is meant to be, and it's a good thing. And for people like you and I, it's kind of like, don't tell me I cannot, because for whatever happened in my past that's created this mentality where I will show you that I can. Challenge accepted, basically, right?
Yeah, the stamp, challenge accepted.
Yeah.
And do we succeed every time? No.
No.
But I think it's part of the intangibles.
Yeah. Well, and I think that motivation is a lot better, for instance, than, and I've experienced this in my past, the fear of failure preventing us from even trying. That is a factor that makes us go, okay, you know what? Yes, I could fail, but it's not going to stop me from trying, because this motivation of somebody saying you can't. And that was a stronger motivation than the fear of failure.
Yeah, I relate to that. That's what I think fired me up with my ex-husband, is him saying, no, you can't have a career.
Yeah.
I would go and I have dinners with all the military wives, and it's officer wives, and then the commander's wife would have a party at her house, and all of them would, well, I teach dance, and I have 9 kids, and every time I go to the dinners, I just feel like this is not what I want my life to be.
No.
I don't want my feedback, or at the end of my life, to be that, I wasn't proud of my life.
Right.
I want to be proud of the accomplishments. I want to have accomplishments. I want to be able to show my son that, look at, I did this. You can do way more.
Look at what a badass your mommy is.
I hope he says that. I hope he says that one day. I'm
Well-
becoming softer.
Well, yeah, of course, but why wouldn't he? Okay, well, that's pretty cool. Okay, so hubby didn't know you were doing this. You're going to the academy, and then what happens?
I let him know, and he was pretty supportive at first. He really didn't. He was apprehensive because his mom, again, was a state trooper, and he saw what she went through and how she was, and she was a tough bitch.
Yeah.
Like, that's a horrible way to put it, but she was.
Which is why he was attracted to a tough bitch.
Yes. She had told me that I couldn't do it. When they all found out I was in the academy, like, Rebecca, you're not strong enough. You can't do this. I was nicknamed Barbie pretty early on, with the guys that I went to the academy with, and then even the people at the police department that I worked for. But when I started on patrol, it was really difficult on our relationship, because I had this confidence about me, like, I've got a gun on my hip, and I'm going to go out there. I fight men that are 3 times your size.
Right.
Like, try me now.
Right.
I'm not proud of who I was at that time in my personal life, but in my professional life, I was so proud of myself, because I did something that people didn't think I could do.
Right.
And even stuff that I doubted that I could actually do. I had really good people who looked after me. I had one field training officer, FTO is the acronym for it. He was a black man, and in the South where I lived, there's still a lot of segregation. Like, people don't really think about that. I didn't think about that coming from the Northwest to where I live. And it's not like, you know, you've got, let's for example, District 2, and then you've got Lee Hills, and you will have demographics of people that live in certain areas, and it's horrible, but that's what happens.
Sure.
And so if you see, you know, a white person running around in District 2 at night, you know that that's somebody you should probably go talk to.
Right.
And that's what I was taught, and that's how this field training officer was. You know, he was considered a minority. I was considered a minority at the police department. So we kind of looked out for each other.
Sure.
He never treated me like a girl, which I had field training officers that were like, you know, after midnight, Rebecca, don't go do anything. That's when it gets dangerous. Go park up. He's like, no, let's set our alarm clocks. We would go smoke cigars.
Yep.
And then the second midnight would hit, those cigars were out and we were out patrolling. I mean, we were talking to people that were riding their bikes, you know, just basic patrol officer at night
Sure.
stuff.
Cop stuff, yeah.
But stuff that, you know, the other male officers didn't want me to do because they didn't know if I was going to get my ass kicked. They didn't know if I was going to be able to hold my own. There was no trust in me at that point. So,
And it's interesting, he was not trying to protect you, so he was allowing you to flourish in the way that you wanted to, and that was a draw to him.
yes, I mean, we became instant friends.
Yeah.
I was absolutely attracted to the fact that he was, you know, as a person, I was attracted to the fact that he didn't belittle me or look at me like I was weak or delicate. And so we got to go out there and do some really cool shit. I
bet.
mean, I learned so much, and I had a lot of opportunity that I wouldn't have gotten with any other FTO.
Right.
He treated me like I was somebody that deserved to be out there. And then when I moved to the next police department, I reflect back on that because my training that I had there, I kicked the training in the second police department. I mean, they had no idea that a girl could come in and do what I did.
Yeah.
You know, my first day riding along at Sulphur Police Department, I was with one of the captains, and, you know, they gave me a uniform. They're like, oh, well, you got to go through training, but we can't start yet. So go ride with this captain. So the first thing that we did was pull over a car, you know, faulty temp tags. You could tell it's written in Sharpie and it's been crossed out 100 times. It's just obvious basic signs. You know, we go up to the car and they have an 8-ball of meth in the car, and it's like, I called it from the beginning. We went through the whole investigation really to get to the permission to search the vehicle, and the captain just kind of looked at me like, you know, damn, like, this is your first day. How do you know all this? Well, I had already had 3 years experience before I got to where I was at.
Right.
And it was 3 years of experience of having a sergeant who worked narcotics. He got pulled out of narcotics to go back on patrol. He taught me how to do search warrants, because in small police departments like that, you don't learn that. Your detectives come out and do it. I did search warrants on houses. I did search warrants on cars. I was talking to, you know, district judges, and that's, in that position, you don't normally do that.
Right.
So, you know, I had really good mentors, but one of them, Willie, he passed away right after I left Leesville Police Department. Him and my other supervisor, I worked swing shifts, so 3 p.m. to 3 a.m. They would sit me down and like, Rebecca, you need to get out of here. You can't stay here. You know, it's Leesville. If you're not from here, there's no respect. You know, you're young, you're a female. They're going to try and chew you up, spit you out, which is exactly what happened.
It is.
And that's what ultimately had me transition. So the sheriff in that area didn't allow women to work certain task force. And I wanted to get narcotics, and I wanted to work undercover. And I was told no, you know, they don't do that with women. I don't know if it's changed now, but that's what it was like when I was there. So if I was going to do what I wanted to do and hit those goals, then I needed to go to some other police department.
So you were at Leesville PD for 3 years.
Leesville PD.
And you said someone, you know, you'll get chewed up and spit out. Time to go to your next adventure.
Yes.
So take us from there. What happened then?
So I was actually dating another police officer at the time. This was probably about 3 years after my divorce. And him and I ended up moving to the Lake Charles area, which is south of Leesville. He worked for Lake Charles, and I went to Sulphur Police Department. Had an opportunity to go to Lake Charles. They offered me a position, but for the fast track and where I was looking at going, I wanted to be a narcotics officer. Knew I wanted to work undercover, wanted to buy dope, wanted to learn everything I could about undercover work, and I wasn't going to have that opportunity as soon as I could at Sulphur. I was impatient. So I went to Sulphur Police Department. I was the only female patrol officer that they had at the time. You know, I started running. I went in with a different perspective. What I learned in Leesville, a lot of lessons for being so naive and so unaware of the types of relationships that people have. I thought everybody wanted to be my friend. They didn't want to be my friend. You know what they wanted to do. Every man that I worked with, it was never in a, hey, let's go work out together, or hey, let's spend time together. For me, it was like that. I always heard about the brotherhood, the sisterhood,
Right.
where we all support each other, have each other's back.
Right.
That's not what it was.
No, they had different agendas.
Different agendas. And I learned that pretty quickly.
So you were naive.
I was extremely naive, extremely naive. I mean, I even had instructors in the police academy like, oh, Rebecca, like, you're the most attractive female that's come through here. Well, they say that kind of stuff. And for me, my perspective, I don't look at myself like I'm an attractive female. I don't look at myself as, it makes me uncomfortable when I hear that, when people tell me, anything about my looks or comment on that. So I had that through the academy, but I was naive to the fact that they're telling me this because they want to get in my pants,
right.
kind of thing.
Sure.
So I learned that pretty early on at Leesville, that these people don't want to be your friends. They just want one thing from you. So when you can find one or two that actually do want to teach you,
Right.
then those are the people that you're going to
Stick to.
gravitate towards.
Right. Sure.
And going back to my dad, I always have this desire to have a strong male role model in my life. I never had the desire to have a strong female role model. It's always been a male role model. So when I transitioned to Sulphur, I worked with all the FTOs there. I had one that the very first FTO I had at Sulphur, field training officer. He had the same amount of time as a law enforcement officer as I did, but I was his first trainee. So it was very contentious at first because
It was blind leading the blind.
That's exactly what it was.
Same level, so you're
Yeah.
like, dude, I'm
Why
your
are you
equal.
teaching me?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
your equal. You can't teach me. And he's
Exactly.
thinking, no, but I've got the title, so I can teach you. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was, he ended up being one of my really good friends later on, but there was a lot that he was still naive to, especially when it came to like, you have RS codes, you have traffic codes. He was the traffic cop. I don't like traffic. I don't like writing tickets. I don't like working car accidents, but that's what he liked to do. So I spent 6 weeks in a car with him in the middle of summer. We would go work traffic and I hated it. I kind of regretted my decision to move. But then from there, I went to an FTO that had the same interest that I did. Like, let's go hunt some dope. Let's go catch some real, criminals. Let's get people for murder. Let's do this or that.
Sure.
Because we both were going down that path of investigators. When I got cut loose, I was the first person at Sulphur to go through an accelerated training program. Just, they've never had done that for people before, but they needed officers so bad and so desperate to be out on the road. So when I got cut loose, I worked patrol for a year at Sulphur.
Cut loose meaning after your training,
After
you were
my
set out on your
training,
own.
driving my police car by
Right.
myself,
Feeling good.
whoop, whoop, all down the road, nobody with me. This was the second time I was cut loose. So it was the freedom that I had previous to go make dope stops.
Right.
And, I laugh at that now. I'm like, dang, that's all I cared about. I just wanted to go find drugs.
Right.
Because I enjoyed it.
Right.
And I get excited about it. And just a little story about that. Like, I had a mom on Christmas. There was a mom that had come up to the police department Christmas Eve, and she had her daughter in the passenger seat. Daughter's in her late 20s or 30s. And the mom's like, I just don't get it. She's trying to find drugs tonight. Can you arrest her so she doesn't go find drugs? And it's not how it works.
Right.
And she goes, I just don't get addiction. And for me, it clicked in that moment. Like, I kind of get it. And it's because every time I have that bag of whatever it is in my hand, it could be pills.
Yeah.
It could be MDMA. It could be meth.
You get a dopamine dump.
I do.
Yeah.
I'm feeling it right now
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
it. It's in my hand and I could feel that like excitement. Like right now my heart's starting to beat.
Sure.
I'm feeling it overcome my body. But the difference between me and the addict is that I'm not going to ingest it.
Right.
So, I know people go down different paths. They get to where they are. They numb, I did that with alcohol for a long time.
Self-medicate. Yeah,
Exactly.
sure.
But that kind of put in perspective for me, explaining it to that mom. Like, this is how I feel when I hold it. I can only imagine how she feels when she has it in her hand and she has that relief of like, I know where my next hit's going to come from. I know when all the pain's going to be gone.
Right.
I know when I'm going to be able to have this burst of energy
Right.
or, whatever the reason is that they do it.
Sure.
They don't have to necessarily do it as long as it's in their hand.
Yep.
They know it's right there and it's there. It's my comfort.
Yeah, Jordan, sorry to interrupt, Jordan Peterson, if you know who that is, Jordan B. Peterson, he's a clinical psychologist, brilliant man from Canada, we were talking about Canada earlier, who's become world famous and just he has amazing things to say. He said, for a lot of people, just the initial thought of about to do cocaine, not the actual physical reaction of your brain releasing dopamine because of the cocaine stimulus. The idea of doing cocaine is already associated to the pleasure of doing cocaine, and that's all they need. And at that point, really, you don't even need to do the physical part because you got the dopamine you're doing it for to begin with.
It's crazy.
It is crazy.
I grew up with my dad telling me, like, people who do drugs are scumbags. You know, you smoke weed, you're a scumbag. You do coke, you're a scumbag. And so, like, my perspective on life was that, oh, these people are doing drugs, they're scumbags.
And that goes back to your dad's programming of how he felt and your respect of your dad. Well, I'm going to be the good guy and I'm going to solve this problem and I'm going to overcome by getting the bad guys the scumbags that do this, which was validating your whole thing with your dad and your love for your dad. That's what started all of that.
It also comes from my mom.
Yeah.
My mom, you know, she was a bus driver for a long time and then ended up going and being a pharmacist assistant. And, you know, my sister and I still argue about this to this day. Like, I know my mom was doing stuff she shouldn't be doing.
Yeah.
You know, I've found it before and I was a little older, so I wasn't as naive to it as, you know, my sister was. And still to this day, she's like, no. You know, Mom never did that. It never happened. Oh, it happened.
She didn't want it to happen, so she's not accepting that it may have happened.
Exactly. So anyhow, I got to start working narcotics and I worked patrol and I just go out and do searches. You know, you're out there, it sounds horrible to say, but you may get a profile in a certain area. It may be, you know, people that you've recognized from other scenarios, whatever it may be, or even you're responding to a shoplifter. You know, that happened. Go to a parking lot accident that ended up being a shoplifter who was trying to run away, who ended up having, you know, an ounce of meth in her pocket or whatever. That had happened on several times. So I would get that dopamine rush, that adrenaline rush of excitement. So about a year later, after starting there, I got brought onto the narcotics division. It's not a big division. It's self-replaced format. It had a history. It was on the news at one point, national news. But I had a really good captain. And that's where that male role model really came in. He was about the same age as my dad, tall, built like him. And I was instantly gravitate. Like, I just was drawn to him, that this is my mentor. He's going to teach me everything I can learn about undercover work and narcotic investigations. And he did.
Yeah.
You know, I beat a couple people out for the position, and a lot of them tried to say, oh, it's because you're a girl, you know, or, you know, whose desk were you sitting under last week kind of thing.
But it was because you were more qualified.
Well, what they didn't realize is that I was coming on my days off.
Yeah.
I wasn't married. I didn't have a kid. I lived by myself, and I was going and doing ops with them for free. I wasn't on the clock. So I look back now, I'm like, damn, what if I would have got shot or hurt, or, you know, what if one of these incidents would have happened?
Yeah.
But I did. I'd volunteer my time just so I could learn because I was that excited. So when I got brought on, I remember my very first day in narcotics, I got a desk. My captain said, you know, set your desk up. Then we're going to start going doing ops. 7 a.m. I went in that day, and I didn't go home till 7 a.m. the next day. We worked 24 hours straight, just search warrants and buys. And
you were just happier than a pig in mud.
Oh, I was so happy. I was so naive, but so happy.
Yeah.
You know, he was a great mentor, and that's kind of where the story turned sour for me. I had this relationship with him. We were so close that I had dated a guy and it didn't end well, and I'd call him and he'd talk me off the ledge, kind of thing, like, you know, don't go crazy, it's fine, you move forward. When I got married, my husband and I flew to Vegas. He flew with us, and he was our ordained minister.
Oh, wow.
He came and saw me immediately after my son was born. I was there when his mom died in the hospital. We were extremely close. Yeah. Extremely close. And, you know, I look back now, there was a conversation we had. They would always move the narcotics offices, and we were standing outside one of the old, nasty narcotics buildings full of mold. And he said, Rebecca, one day I want all this to be yours. And he looked at it like his baby, the narcotics department, and working with other agencies and the reputation that had been built. And it was like he was grooming me, but also giving me all the information I could ever need to be a well-rounded narc. And I'm still appreciative to this day for everything that he gave me and taught me.
How do you mean it went sour?
So with him, I got brought on to a DEA task force. There was a pill diversion case that I worked that ended up going all over the state of Louisiana, state of Texas, just pill fraud. And I had a binder about this big. I had hundreds of charges that were placed on this lady. So I kind of got invited to join a task force with the DEA. He had never been approached about that before. So it was kind of like, he was proud of me at first, like, oh, wow, this is really cool. And then it kind of soured, like, hey, do they have any more of those spots? Is there other positions available?
Oh, did he feel slighted or overlooked because he did not get offered?
You know, that's how I interpret it.
Yeah. So did his attitude towards you change?
It changed. That's when it started to change. And then once I had my son, once I got in a relationship and once I had my son, you know, my priorities changed. Like I didn't need to work until 2 a.m. every night. I wanted to be home with my child.
Sure.
You know, and then also the fact that I hate to say it, and this is just my speculation and just things that I worked out over the last few years with my husband, is like, you know, I was no longer available. And so I couldn't be pimped out in a way as available, and not saying that he's pimping me out for sexual favors,
Right.
but you know, we would go do undercover operations all over the state of Louisiana, all over the state of Texas. And one of the things that made, you know, I felt like he kind of used me in a way, like, I've got this young female, she could go buy whatever she wants, you know, prostitute.
You made him look better, and he
I did.
needed that.
I did.
And then you weren't available to do that anymore, and it hurt him. It made him mad. It whatever.
Yeah.
That had a negative effect on him.
It did.
And he did not react properly to it. He should
Did
have.
not.
He could have and should have been more evolved to the point where he was just happy for you and realized, okay, well, I don't have that anymore, but I'm going to be happy.
Well,
for
I
her.
mean, I was going to go right back. You know, I was still doing ops when I was pregnant.
Yeah.
I did a prostitution op in Baton Rouge while I was 4 months pregnant.
Wow.
I was a prostitute that was getting people who wanted to be with pregnant women. I was still doing this.
Sure.
It was the fact that my body changed, my posture changed, you know, the maturity that I had changed.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't this ditzy, naive thing that you could throw out there, put in a bar and go, oh, you have, you know, a gram of weed I can buy from you. It was a little different. And so, you know, if I look back, I'm like, man, if you would have just waited 1 year, after a year, things were going back to normal.
Yeah.
I just had to get through, you know,
He couldn't
being
see,
a new mom.
He couldn't see that far ahead.
Yeah. So our relationship kind of changed a little bit after I had my son, but when it really got bad, he started having a relationship with a gal from the Attorney General's office. And him and I were part of a task force called ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children. So we were initially brought on because of the drug environment. So you've got people that do investigations, you know, like online.
Is he still living?
He is still living.
Okay.
No.
So just for liability purposes, this
Not
is your
mentioning his
no,
name,
but
yeah.
this is your understanding, your opinion, and your perspective. You're not saying, in fact, that this is true. This is what you understand of the situation.
Yes.
So there's no slander, libel, or anything else like that. This is your recollection and your perspective.
And that's why I want to word it the way I word
Sure.
it. Just, I'm not going to say his name and too
Good.
much of that,
Yeah.
but you can't sue for defamation if it's true.
That's
So-
true. We don't, yeah, the stuff that's true,
Right,
you
yeah.
know for true, but the rest is perspective.
So anyway, yeah, the perspective of, you know, he was having a lot of difficult times in his life and his marriage. His wife had also, you know, been around a lot. I had a relationship with her. She worked where we worked. But we joined ICAC, and from my understanding, when we first joined it, we were there just to be the dope people. When you kick in the door of somebody who, you know, is creating child pornography, or you're kicking in the door of somebody who had a conversation with a juvenile online that was sexual in nature, or, you know, you have someone who's making bestiality, whatever that case may be, we were there. And so we kick in the door, and there would typically be drugs involved in that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've had it to where we kicked at a door, there was mom laying in her bed, she had a meth needle in her arm with her baby laying next
Oh
to
my
her.
God.
And it was an active meth lab. So you have these people who don't have a drug background, that don't understand that you're in a meth lab and this is really dangerous. So that was why we got brought on.
Right.
I ended up getting stuck in a situation where I had to interview, I was definitely stuck, interview a child victim. And that was new for me. But the gal who worked for the Attorney General's office, she brought me in and she said, we're going to do this and I need you there, because the child bonded to me pretty quickly. And I kind of fell in love with it because that child like trusted me
Right.
and felt okay to tell me what had happened.
And now
to her.
your role was a protector.
And now I'm a protector.
Yep.
I'm an extreme protector, especially over children. And so for me, it was like I was drawn to this because of the undercover capacity that I had. I could sit and have an interview with a suspect who committed heinous crimes against children
Right.
and make them feel like they were my friend and have this open dialogue. And I have a saying, don't yuck my yum. I'm not going to sit there and yuck your yum. Do I agree with it? I definitely don't agree with anything bestiality, child. No, I don't agree with that in any way. But sitting in those conversations and having those interviews, I didn't make them feel like I was yucking their yum.
And that's why they were comfortable talking to you.
Exactly.
Which was your job to get that information.
And it wasn't initially, but then I started transitioning into being more of that investigator when it came to ICAC and having those conversations with suspects and children. You know, we had some crazy things that we were a part of.
Yeah.
I have some stories that I look back and I laugh at them now. Like, I'll give you one. Yoshi. You know who Yoshi is? Little green dinosaur from Super Mario Brothers.
Okay.
So we go to do a search warrant at a guy's house. He was communicating with a 14-year-old online. We get there and he's standing on the front porch, so we don't have to kick down the door or anything. I enter into his house and there's like Yoshi all over the wall, just framed pictures of this green dinosaur.
Yeah.
And he had stuffed animals everywhere. And I'm like, this dude's a little into Yoshi. Then you cross the threshold of his bedroom and Yoshi changed in nature. It's Yoshi with a strap on. It's Yoshi. It was he believed he was in a relationship with Yoshi.
Wow.
To the point to where we started doing, computer searches. Most of his pornography was Yoshi pornography. Yeah.
So that's when it went from a weird sexual deviance to mental illness, to where reality was not a thing anymore.
He believed it. Yeah. He really believed it. And so I look back and I laugh at that, and it's kind of like a depravity, right? It's his mind was...
Well, that's what gave him the dopamine dump that you and I get from other things that are way less unhealthy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, that's one of, I look at more of one of the innocent ones that I got to partake in when it came to search warrants and the things that people had done. But, you do that for so long. The people that I worked with from the Attorney General's office, they've been doing it for 10 plus years. And you're supposed to rotate out 5 years.
They're probably really desensitized by that point, which is not good for their psyche and their mental and emotional state.
A lot of self-medicating.
Oh, yeah.
Their relationships were unhealthy that they had with people.
I'll bet.
I found myself kind of slipping into that.
Yeah.
Because I had started ICAC before I got married, before I was in a relationship, before I got married, before I had my son. And... it made the drug world look simple, easy, kind.
It's a quick fix.
Exactly.
It's a quick way to numb, medicate, or get that dopamine dump or that up. When you're self-medicating, you're trying to get down because you're here and you needed balance. But when you want the cocaine or the meth or whatever the one is, the stimulant, then you're looking for the up because you're too down here. You're looking for balance at all times.
But at the end, you always just go back to depression. So your uppers, your downers, whatever it may be.
Yeah, unless you can find that balance through something less unhealthy than alcohol or drugs. Yeah, and sometimes for some people it's sex. For some people it's Yoshi.
Yeah.
Looking for that balance.
Oh yeah. Some people are into something. Like I said, I don't yuck people's yums, but I think I got a crash course in the real world when I got into narcotics, and then ultimately was part of ICAC, because that was stuff that I didn't know actually existed in the world.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you two questions. One, I want to start with what's the worst thing that happened to you during this job, and then I'm going to ask you after that so we can go back up, because we're going to go here, and then I want to go back up here to balance things out. What is the best thing? Let's start with what is the most, and I know you're a fighter and I know you're strong.
Yeah.
What would this audience see as the most traumatic and negative experience of your career?
There were a lot. There were a lot, and this is one thing that I talk about a lot with people now in the industry that have similar backgrounds to me. It's like you go through daily trauma. You're constantly going through trauma. You can have 6 different types of trauma in one day, and then you have to push it down because then you have to go to the next day and you have more trauma.
Sure.
And to be honest, my worst experience probably would not be someone else's worst experience, but it was the first.
Then I want both.
Experience.
I want your worst, and then I want what other people would think is worst.
Oh, geez.
Because the story I heard was pretty intense, but it doesn't sound like, maybe I got bad information, or we're talking about something different. Wasn't there some situation where you were like kidnapped or something?
Oh, no, no, no.
Or held?
I got my ass beat.
You got beat up.
I was left alone.
Okay.
So, you know, where the incident happened. So if we talk about what I would say is my most traumatic as an event that's not related to me personally.
Yeah.
I mean, I was personal. I was doing underage tobacco buys, underage alcohol purchases. So I had a juvenile, send them out. And then after we were done with that, there was a team of us that would go out and write tickets to people who sold.
Right.
And we were heading out to go write tickets. There were 3 of us, and a call came in from a 2-year-old drowning in a bathtub.
Oh.
You know, and for me, I always looked at like my uniform was like my shield. So the badge, quite literally, my dad and I had this conversation years ago, but the badge quite literally was a shield for me.
Protected you from the
actual experience.
Right.
It wasn't real.
It was your honor, your separation.
Exactly.
So you didn't have a direct emotional attachment to it.
So if it wasn't real to me, but during this time I was wearing my normal people clothes, right? I'm a civilian, I'm out there, and that's how I felt. And so I show up and run in the door, and the dad has his 2-year-old son in his arms that he pulled out of the bathtub, and he'd been trying to give him CPR. And I hear another kid screaming in the room. And so, you know, instantly, like, I'm one of those people, and I think you kind of have to be this way as a law enforcement officer, that when I'm in a traumatic situation, everything like slows down.
Absolutely.
Everything slows down, and I'm thinking what I need to do next in order to preserve life or to make sure everybody's okay.
To control the situation.
Yes, control for sure. So I pulled the child and I started giving him CPR, and I knew he was gone. But I kept doing it, and the dad's screaming at me, you know, like, what's wrong with him? Save him. And he's a ball. Yeah. And they had chili dogs for dinner. And the child threw up in my mouth. You know, we had too much air that was already in his lungs and his stomach. And so he vomited in my mouth. I vomited on the floor, but I still just kept trying. And I don't even know how long I tried, but I remember one of the other officers on my team, he'd run in and he's like, do you need to switch? And no, like, there's nothing we can do, but I'm not going to stop.
Right.
So the fire department showed up and I was a mess. That was the first time I had ever gone to a call or any kind of situation to where I was visibly shaken. I was bawling my eyes out. The whole time I was doing CPR, I was bawling my eyes out. I wasn't married. I didn't have a child at the time.
Right.
So for me, it was like a shocker. I remember stepping outside. The final straw for me was the paramedics showed up and they gave the child a shot of epinephrine.
Adrenaline.
Yeah, adrenaline, really. And I just remember one of the captains just getting really pissed off, like, you're trying to nickel and dime his family, you know he's been dead. And it was a horrible scene, a horrible situation.
Right.
So I had gone outside and I threw up again in front of one of the units, and we had the DA had showed up on scene. He was a new DA at the time, district attorney, along with supervisors, captains, and I very clearly had been upset and was crying. And he looked at me and he was like, she needs to go to counseling. I was like, dude, like, this just happened right now. Yeah. So for me, it was like, this is one of the most traumatic things that I've witnessed because as a child, I've seen people die. I've been there where people were shot. You know, that's traumatic to some people, but this was traumatic to me.
Yeah.
The worst part was that Mom was at Buffalo Wild Wings waitressing. First time Dad was left home alone with the kids.
Oh my God.
He put son in the bathtub with this much water, was taking care of daughter who was in the high chair cleaning up. So it wasn't even like it was malicious.
No.
It was an
or neglect. I mean, well, we know now that much water can drown a child, but common sense, you would think, well, it wouldn't bother me. Nobody's taught me this before, so he didn't know, and it was the one time that it happened, and that's just so devastating.
And he said it wouldn't. He doesn't recall it being that long. He said maybe 10 minutes max.
Yeah. Well, it takes 30 seconds.
Yeah, but it was really traumatizing. And they have something called EP, where they send you to go to this counselor who's supposed to counsel you.
Emotional something, yeah.
And I refused to go. Yeah. And so they brought the EP counselor to the police department, and all the other officers who were open about how much it had hurt them, they went and sat with me. So I've got a sergeant who's big, tough, and rough, and he's crying. And I have another one that's saying, I sat in my driveway for an hour just, like, thinking, what if that was my kid? And I'm just like, you're not going to get me to say anything, kind of thing. But I had my emotional release with my friends, you know, like afterwards, and to talk about it.
Your therapy.
But to be honest, I really didn't face that until my son was taking his first bath, real bath in the bathtub.
And then it all came back.
I had a panic attack. I had never had one before. But, you know, he wasn't in the little tub part anymore. He was actually in the bathtub. So, and there was about this much water in there. I never, like, even to this day, he's 5, and I kind of go and check him every couple minutes.
Yeah.
But, he had that first bath, and I don't remember. I just remember looking at him, the water was running, and thank God my husband was there, because I immediately went into a panic attack. I don't remember any of it. I was breathing hard. I didn't have any thoughts. It was like I blacked out. And I came back when my husband, Andrew, he grabbed my arm and he said, "Rebecca, are you okay?"
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm not okay.
Yeah.
So.
Now, this is what's fascinating to me about the human brain. Had you been open to that counseling that day, you would have processed that experience.
Yep.
You would have gotten the emotion out. You would have been emotionally healthy. And then that would not have happened years later when you were sitting with your son. And
it probably would not have been my most
but you weren't
traumatic
ready.
event.
You weren't ready for it yet.
No, I was not. Because I had this stigma, again, I never looked at it like I'm a female, so I have to be, or people are holding things against me.
Sure.
It's more, I'm a female. I can't be this way because I don't want them to look at me like I'm weak.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be the one that's weak because she's the mom, or she's a female, so it's gonna be harder on her that this kid drowned.
Right.
It wasn't. I mean, it was just as hard on me as it was the men, and the men were more expressive in how difficult it was for them.
So here is what I want to take from that experience for my audience. And I've learned this already, and more recently it's been very, very reinforced. If you have that much negative energy towards something, which you had negative energy towards the counseling because you're like, I don't need it, and you had this resistance is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel that the butterflies in your stomach because you recognize this intense resistance, that is when you lean into it. That is when you say, nope, okay, this resistance is bad. I know it's stopping me from evolving from this experience. And you lean into it and you do it anyway, because you're supposed to have that experience to get through that so it doesn't come back later and affect you negatively.
I mean, I learned that years later.
Yeah.
There was a lot of trauma, and a lot of it was internally for me at the police department.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't, it got to the point to like my last 2 years, I would go to work and I wasn't afraid of what people on the street would do to me. I had people who put hits on my head, who would pay people to kill me. And I wasn't afraid of the public. I was afraid of the people I worked with.
Yeah.
And so that's where the trauma.
Because those are the ones that you had previously trusted, but then had been betrayed by or deceived by or somehow negatively affected you. So now your resistance and your hyper-focus and vigilance was, holy shit, I've got to protect myself from the internal people. Yeah. These people I'm not worried about. It's these people that I'm afraid of now.
Well, it was different. What triggered that for me at the police department was different, because I had the ally. I had, the most respected captain as my captain. I had, the trust and the support of, the administrators, of people who were very high ranking at the police department. I had that. And we're, leading into the incident that you've been told about, it all started internally. And
really?
yes.
Oh, this is a twist I was not aware
of. For me, I've talked to a lot of people about this, and this is where my trauma is the most, and what ultimately led me out of law enforcement altogether. But it all stemmed from the relationship of, a supervisor and somebody from a different department. Mm-hmm. That happens a lot. That's law enforcement.
Sure.
People, they do that.
Sure.
Everybody cheats on their spouse. It's like a consistent thing. At least at the department where I was at, if you look at the divorce rates, it's absolutely astonishing.
Not a healthy environment.
No,
for a relationship.
It's horrible. It's horrible. And if you have a healthy relationship, there's a lot of people who want to, ruin that.
Because they're envious, they're jealous,
envious.
Because you've got something they want and they don't want you to have it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So, kind of where things started to sour, he was having his relationship, I had my child, and I was back at it doing search warrants. I started using Snapchat. I was one of the first law enforcement officers in the country to buy drugs using Snapchat.
Oh.
We know dope trade was happening long before law enforcement got involved.
Sure.
But, my career was really growing. I had lots of opportunity, and the relationship that happened between those two people impacted my career. And it started because I didn't say anything. Mm-hmm. It wasn't my business. Like, for me, it's, right. I don't want to be a part of anybody's drama. I'm going to stay in my own lane. Sure. I have my own problems I got to deal with, my own relationships, that kind of stuff. But then malfeasance in office was being committed. on the daily. Money was missing. Cars were used when they shouldn't have been used, that didn't have tracking devices. You know, saying that you stayed on the clock till 3 a.m. when we got off at 5,
Right.
you were at your girlfriend's hotel room, kind of stuff.
Right.
And so again, that's not my business. Like I'm not gonna go run and tell on you, which I should have. But I kind of kept my mouth shut and just stayed in my lane. And I talked to my husband about it, and you know, he kept giving me warnings like, this is gonna get bad. You need to remove yourself from the narcotics division. You need to not be there. But for me, it was like, no, this is my career. This is what I want to do. This is what I love.
Yeah.
Like, I'll sit here and be quiet because I want to be able to keep doing what I want to do.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the news came out, and me being the ally and me being there every day, you know, I was brought in and I was questioned about it.
The ally being, so your supervisor you were close to.
Extremely close. Extremely close.
Are we talking about the captain?
Yes. This is the one that married my husband and I in Vegas.
Got it. Okay, got it.
So extremely close, father figure, you know, extreme mentor to me.
Right.
I had nothing but respect for him. But through this process, it was like a 2-year process of him being in this relationship and watching him kind of like go downhill.
Yeah.
And he was dragging me with him.
Yeah.
I didn't look at it that way at the time, but now I reflect back and I'm like, yeah, damn, I should have just got out when my husband said to.
Yeah. Well, you had a certain amount of loyalty because he'd meant a lot to you and was a mentor and
I'm
stuff.
a very
and you didn't
loyal
want to
person.
hurt him.
No. Extremely loyal person.
To a fault
To a
at some
fault.
point, sure.
Yes.
Well, that's what loyalty will typically do. That's when you got to have balance with loyalty and your brain and go, this is no longer good for me. It's hurting me. So now it's time. They don't deserve my loyalty anymore because they're allowing me to be hurt by their actions.
3, 4, 5 years later, yes,
Yeah.
I know that. But at the time, I
course,
didn't.
of
You know,
course.
I was so...
But you learned that lesson through that
I
experience.
did. It changed my life. So going through there, it got really bad. It got so bad to the point to where I got brought in with the chief of police in the area and all of the administrators. And, you know, I told the truth. I didn't lie.
Until next time, please connect with me on your favorite social media platform where you can follow me on my personal journey